Well, Kevin, it's very good to see you. And I haven't exactly flown to Geneva for the interview and for our conversation, but it's a place that I'm reasonably familiar with. How long have you now been based in Geneva?
Well, good afternoon, Stephen. You're welcome to come here anytime you would like to. Perhaps post-COVID, we could be a little more sociable. I've been here for 5 years on a full-time basis, though for the preceding 10 years, I was coming over here for the occasional meetings.
Right. So yes, do you come back to the UK for things, or are you based permanently out there, really?
My role is permanently here, apart from travel in normal times, but I have maintained a home in London, and I was coming back pretty much every month until, of course, this last year, when we've had the very formal ban, in fact, on UN diplomats from travelling.
Do you have a flat or a house or whatever in Geneva? Or?
I have the most gorgeous flat in the old town of Geneva. I don't know if you know the old town, but I'm
yes.
Cobble Street, and the main windows look out onto the Jura Mountains in the distant background, and in the closer foreground there's a gorgeous fountain square and the Grand Théâtre of Geneva and the Parc des Bastions. I'm really very fortunate. The building was constructed in 1710, and there's some fabulous architecture in the building.
It's a nice place. I always think, though, when I go to the cathedral in Geneva, that the long arm of the Reformation still presides over it to some degree. It's fairly sort of austere inside.
I would say extremely austere, and I actually feel that the vibes of scorn from Calvin as I walk around.
Okay, Kevin, so I think you were saying when we were chatting a minute ago before we started that you were brought up in the south of England, in Sussex and Hampshire, and you spent your time there until you left for university, or?
Yes, absolutely. So in and around Chichester for my early years, and then at school in Southsea for the senior school, St. John's College. And when I left there, I then went off to Oxford University.
Right, and when you went to Oxford, you were at which college?
Originally Greyfriars.
Oh, Greyfriars, yes.
Yes. Yep. Greyfriars, they, about 10 years ago, merged in with Regent's College. And so I'm now officially an alumnus of Regent's.
Right, yeah, yeah. And when you were there, what did you read?
History.
History, right. And you've had a most extraordinary career so far, just looking back at it. But you've spent quite a lot of time dealing with publishing.
Yes. I'm a little bit of an accidental publisher, but I have worked in 4 or 5 different publishing or publishing related roles. And certainly that is the common thread of my last 20 years.
And you had a spell where I see, you know, I could feel myself on an aeroplane and sometimes on a coach, and sometimes even better sitting at the steering wheel of my car, when I read about Thomas Cook and then Rough Guides with Pearson and RAC Publishing and so on. Can you tell us a little bit about that, what you did there?
Well, RAC Publishing was my first foray into publishing, and they were essentially directories, which of course are completely defunct now, because all the information for hotels and bed and breakfasts and campsites can be found very, very easily on the internet. But that was my first taste of publishing. I then moved to Thomas Cook, where they had the very famous Interrail timetables, which anybody who's been interrailing will absolutely have used. But they wanted to build onto that a travel guide publishing business, which I effectively set up. And I also built a magazine publishing operation. Very interestingly, at Thomas Cook, although I went there to work on publishing, within the first few weeks, I discovered there was a very unpopular little group of people who were working on what was called consumer futures. And out of the many, many thousands of Thomas Cook employees, there were 5 of them. And I was asked to join that group. And quite quickly, we decided that we would invest in this thing called the internet. And we set up a Thomas Cook website, which was very unpopular in my first year there, and nobody wanted to be part of that team. It was considered to be a waste of money and a certain failure. And then a couple of years later, we were the most popular team. And if I recall correctly, I think our budget went up to £60 million worth of expenditure. It was absolutely an extraordinary journey.
And was this in what, the early 90s or?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, or probably more the late 90s.
Late 90s, was it? Yes. Yeah.
Mid 90s.
And then when did you get to you then moved on to Pearson's, and that's where you got caught up with the rough guides, was it?
That's right. So I'd done 5 years at Thomas Cook, and I'd set up quite a nice little business. And a headhunter came knocking on the door and said, Pearson has just bought Rough Guides and they'd like somebody to run it for them. Now, they did actually inherit the entire management team, which had founded Rough Guides, in fact, but it was a relatively uncorporate management structure. And Pearson is a fairly major PLC corporation, and they wanted somebody to knock it into profitability and drive some growth. And that was the task that I was given. I was very excited to do that because at the time Rough Guides was a really major brand. All my friends called me an icon of modern culture, which I guess I was quite pleased to be. It was very trendy.
Well, it's very interesting for me because at the moment I've always been a great devotee of the old series of Shell County Guides, which were pioneered by John Betjeman and then probably given their real sort of kudos by John Piper, the artist. And they were sponsored by Shell, but they ceased to operate really in the late 80s. But since then, there have been 1 or 2 produced, not under the Shell name. And I'm just actually in the business at the moment of writing the Shell Guide. Well, it's not, we can't call it that, but it's basically, quotes, not the Shell Guide to Northumberland. So I'm now after raising various sort of bits of money for a subvention because these things are always quite expensive to publish. But did you remember the Shell Guides? You probably don't.
I'm afraid I don't remember the Shell Guides, no. But are you familiar with the Brat travel guides? Because they have, in the last few years, launched a series focusing on rather more restricted regions of the UK to complement their rather less well-visited overseas destinations. I don't know if you would possibly fit into their remit.
Well, I don't know. I've got a contract anyway now, so I'm on the way. It's just yes, Shell were interesting because there are the Pesner Buildings of England guides, which are technical, architectural guides, very good, I think, excellent.
Yes,
but the Shell guides are more quirky, you know, and so people would say to you, you know, about do you know X place? And I remember somewhere in Norfolk, I think it was Dilham or somewhere in Norfolk, tiny little place. And the Shell guide would say, yes, the North Walsham and Dilham Canal ended here. It was also the place where Lewis Cubitt, who designed King's Cross Station, was born. So you get funny little quirky facts like that, you know. Okay, so you were then at Pearson's, and then did you go directly from there to where you are now?
No, after Pearson, I had a knock on the door which said, we've been told that you would make the most excellent chief executive for the copyright licensing agency. And I said to this headhunter, well, you have to be kidding. I'm running Rough Guys, which is possibly one of the best known brands in the UK. And now you're asking me to go to an organization I've never even heard of myself, let alone anybody else hearing of it. They persisted, and they explained to me the pivotal importance of intellectual property to the UK economy, and how I would have to take a higher level of interest in international affairs and parliamentary affairs. And actually, it sounded really rather fascinating in the end, and it indeed was very fascinating. And I'd grown Rough Guide by 50% in my 5 years. I thought that was quite a good track record. So I actually accepted a new challenge, went to the copyright agency, did my 7 years there, and actually delivered 70% growth during that period.
Oh, gosh. And tell me, why did they think that you would be good at? I'm sure it was obvious that you'd be good at copyright. As you said yourself, it's quite a leap. What made that leap happen, do you think?
I think it was probably a bit of flattery and flannery on their part, to be honest. But they did observe a few things. Firstly, as a publisher, I had some notions of the importance of copyright. So that was the starting point. But in parallel to the preceding probably 15 years, I had actually been doing various bits of work with the Foreign Office. So I was reasonably well known in government circles. And I think it was decided that that would be a very transferable skill from what I'd been doing with the Foreign Office into the space for intellectual property. And that proved to be the case.
I see. And yeah, coming on to intellectual property, let me give you an example to see if you can explain to me a bit more about this. Because when I was the Dean of Norwich in Norfolk, we were raising lots of money. And one of the things we decided was that the Norwich Union insurance companies, it was then, ought to be giving us some money, because they had used our spire for something like 75 years as their logo. Now, whose intellectual property was the spire? Was it ours, or was it theirs because they'd used it as a logo?
Well, that is a slightly complicated question. So if somebody had drawn a picture of, I hesitate to, I immediately have to say I'm not a copyright lawyer, okay?
No.
This is not legal advice. However, if somebody had drawn that spire or taken a picture of that spire, the intellectual property in that picture or image or drawing would actually be the ownership of the person who'd created that work of art. That's a starting point. Now, you can then stray a little into kind of brand and design. So if the architect who had originally designed the spire was still alive, that they would have some sort of a claim, possibly to share in the rights. But considering the fact that it was constructed presumably 500 years previously,
nearly 1,000, 900 years.
There we go. And I imagine you didn't still have the contract with the architect. So I think your claim would probably have been ill-founded. How did it pan out in the end?
Oh no, it all turned out very well, because I think they realised that they'd done very well out of Norwich Cathedral. And I think I'm right in saying that we had a huge appeal. We had to raise £14 million, yeah, but they gave us £500,000. So I've no complaint, really.
A generous donation.
Yeah. So yeah, now perhaps we should move you on now to the World Intellectual Property Organization. Can you say a bit about what that does and what your role in that is?
Sure. Well, we are a specialized agency of the United Nations, and our headquarters is on the Place des Nations, I don't know if you know it very well, but we're right opposite the big alleyway of flags where all the people speak when they're speaking from the UN. So we do roughly what it says on our label, on our tin, which is we look after intellectual property. And there are three branches of intellectual property: patents, trademarks, and copyright, which, as you can imagine quite easily, I think, underpins pretty much all economic activity, because any kind of discovery, whether it's engineering or pharmaceutical, attracts a patent. So that underpins economic activity. Brands and trademarks, they cover all sorts of other economic activities. And copyright, in the broadest possible sense, underpins the entire creative industries. So we're very, very important to the economic well-being of the entire world. Now, we operate initially through multilateral agreements in the form of treaties. So there's a patent cooperation treaty in which most countries of the world agree to treat each other's patents with respect, and there are infrastructures set up to enable that. And the same thing applies via a whole suite of different treaties for brands and trademarks and copyrights. So those treaties negotiated between member states established the basic rules, but they then go on to say that the member state will actually have to create their own national legislation to mirror the minimal requirements of the treaty. And not all member states do that. So it's a very complex system, but it's one which attempts to deliver fairness.
That's really interesting. And of course, now moving on to stationers, it's great that you're a stationer. And I can remember not that long ago, perhaps 5 or 6 years ago, having at least one, if not a couple of evenings focused entirely on copyright and what that still means. Because presumably it's much more complex living in a world with the internet, where it's quite hard to keep track on what people are using.
It most certainly is. We've had a number of conferences and meetings over the last few years attempting to bring some kind of level playing field and fairness to copyright in the digital environment, and in particular for platforms, digital platforms. And it's we aren't there yet. We absolutely aren't there, but we are at least opening the subject, and that should be helpful.
Well, when eventually you do come back, as I assume you will do, to the UK, I can see that the stations might well leap on you to say, right, there's some really interesting things we'd like to hear you talking about or engaging with. But being out there in Geneva, alongside your work, what sort of things keep you interested? What other things are you involved in?
I mostly have time for a little bit of sport, so I do a fair amount of cycling, which is absolutely gorgeous. Cycling by the lake, cycling up the mountains. It's actually quite a popular sport over here. And discovering this part of Europe. I have known it, I have seen it, but I spend a bit of time traveling around when possible. That being said, I have maintained a few links back with the UK. So I am currently patron of a charity called Prisoners Abroad, having previously been chairman. And I am still, but only for a few more days, chairman of the Waterways Ombudsman, which provides an ombudsman service to all the canals and rivers, or most canals and rivers in the UK. So I've maintained 2 small links back in the UK.
Oh, that's really interesting. And I'm assuming from what you said, because you're at St John's College in Southsea and so on, that you were brought up in a Roman Catholic family and so on.
Yes.
What does it feel then like to be in Geneva, which is always seen as the heart of the Reformation?
Well, actually, I live 3 minutes walk away from Calvin's Cathedral, and 5 minutes walk away from the Mur des Réformateurs. It's a Reformation wall which has all of the key characters of the Reformation. But that being said, Geneva is a wonderfully inclusive place. It's the diplomatic capital of Switzerland. It has that epithet, and we have a very, very wide range of people from all 200 member states. So it's a very inclusive society, and it's a great pleasure to be here.
Yes, and presumably there are plenty of Roman Catholics as well around, because they'll be on either side of Switzerland, in France and elsewhere, of course. Yeah.
Yes.
Kevin, it's been really fascinating to talk, and I look forward, presumably you do sometimes get back to the UK, and I hope perhaps there might be an opportunity when you do to try and see if we could coincide at a dinner at Stationers' Hall or something like that. It'd be very good.
That would be a great pleasure. I look forward to that day.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen.